Welcome to lecture number 5 of Introduction to Computer Vision and Machine Learning. So let's start with the lesson. But before that, I would like to ask you, did you submit the files for the programming assignment number 1 to the online platform already? I had several students who already submitted their homework assignment, actually most of them, but there are still several people who didn't submit it yet. So if you have any trouble, if you couldn't upload your files for any reason, just let me know through my just write an email to my email address, and I'll try to help you out. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. So today's topics. Today, as I mentioned before, we're gonna be looking at segmentation. This is a very interesting problem, and we're gonna talk about different algorithms that are commonly used for segmentation. For example, one of them is k-means. Another one quite similar but a little bit more improved one is a mean shift, and then we have binary segmentation, and then a more advanced graph-based segmentation. Then we're going to go ahead and see the structure of motion, and see in particular different types of feature-based approaches for example for modeling based on different positions of camera based on the motion. And then at the end, we're going to look at the motion analysis. In particular, we're going to talk about a particular algorithm for optical flow analysis, which is also very useful. So let's go ahead and start with the segmentation. So this is an image about segmentation. As you can see here, there are different pictures, and the pictures, they have some segments or some parts of the image that have been split into different parts depending on the different similarities or properties. Okay, so this is an example of image segmentation, and basically the goal of segmentation is to group together similar looking pixels or properties of the image. So for example, here we have two images, and in them the images, they are using superpixels. This is actually a little bit more advanced topic, but I would like to make use of this example so you can understand the concept of segmentation. So usually, images are they consist of a lot of pixels, right? But in case they are not using exact pixels, they are using superpixels, which are groups of several pixels. So based on these groups of several pixels, they are trying to compute some similarity on the different superpixels, and based on this, you can come up with a more bottom-up approach of how to construct the different segments of the image, as you can see here. So this is a bottom-up approach because it's using like the low-level features of the image, starting from pixels and then building up into superpixels, and then from there you can group together superpixels to find different segments. Now, another goal for segmentation is how to separate image into incoherent objects, some objects or some segments that have actual meaning. For example, if we have this image, we want to separate the objects not only based on the color or this type of texture, but also into something that has particular meaning. Okay, for example, if we have a human and we want to actually segment out the human, not only based on segment the t-shirt based on one color or the pants based on a different color. So we want to come up with a meaningful segmentation. But this human segmentation is actually a little bit difficult because, well, this is based on top-down approach. First, we come up with the meaning, and then we go down all the way to segment to the pixels. So this is a top-down process, and based on the top-down process, we talked in the last class about Gestalt, the Gestalt laws, based on how we actually make grouping, right? Do you remember this? So this is based on the elements. They have different properties that are very meaningful to us. For example, we can actually group different objects based on how familiar the configuration is in a particular object, or whether they have symmetry properties, or even though they have occlusion, we can still come up with the meaning of this particular group. So just as a review, These are several Gestalt factors, as we saw before, based on proximity or similarity or continuity or closure. So these are very useful to know. Okay, now what's the problem? Well, the problem is that even though they are very intuitive, they are actually very difficult to use in not to use, I mean to translate as algorithms. Okay, so it's easy to understand because it's intuitive for humans, but for a machine it's not really it's not really easy to do. Okay, so we need to implement algorithms to be able to do this, but it's very difficult. So what we're going to do is start with a bottom-up approach. So the bottom-up approach, as I said before, is that we start with the actual clustering. So clustering is to actually put together different, for example, it can be features of texture, features of color, and then try to find the similarity in between all these different elements. So here in this case, for example, the question is, so how many clusters are there in the image? How do we define this? Can be defined automatically, or do we have to define it by ourselves? And then also, how do we know which data elements belong to which group? So again, this is also based on similarity, and one particular algorithm for this that we're gonna see today is the k-means algorithm, which is based on the distances of these images. So before I talk about the k-means algorithm, let me talk about, how do we define this. For example, if we have this image, okay, and so the image has different pixels. As you can see here, these different pixels have different values in the RGB space, as we can see here. And in last lecture we saw how we can actually map these values into a 3D feature space, as you can see here on the right bottom of the image. So if we have a 3D feature space, then we can actually cluster these images based on the the distances between each feature or each pixel, okay, in particular space. So as I mentioned, for this, a very common approach is the k-means clustering algorithm. So let's talk about this algorithm. So k-means algorithm is, for example, in the left image we can see that we have a different sets of data points, okay, and for us it's very intuitive to say that, okay, yes, we can see that there are actually 4 groups of let's say these dots like pixels, right? So but how do we come up with this? Okay, how can we make an algorithm do this automatically? Okay, and basically the outcome of this k-means is shown in the right. Okay, as you can see here, it actually was able to segment or cluster these 4 groups of elements. So let's see how this is performed. So as I mentioned, for k-means, this is a partitional clustering because we are partitioning all these different groups of data. Okay, so initially, let's say we have different set of data points. Okay, and these data points they can be in a real value space. Okay, and they can have different number of attributes, in which we can say dimensions in the data. So I was talking right now for an image in the RGB space. Right now we only have 3D space. Three spaces, right? So if we can actually have even more different elements or different dimensions, and then this might become a little bit more complex, but still it's doable. So now this k-means algorithm, the partitions are given into k clusters. So one of the key aspects about the k-means algorithms is that we need to select the number of clusters. So each cluster has a center, the center of each cluster, which is called a centroid, and then we specify how many centroids we're going to have in the image. So let's look at the actual algorithm. As you can see here, first we have the image on the bottom left, okay, where we have different elements. Let's call them A, B, C, and then we have D and E, and then we have these gray dots, in which these are called the seeds or the K elements, or the centroids. Okay, so in this case, the algorithm will start with K equal to 2. Okay, so then we need to assign each data point to the closest centroid. So we compute the Euclidean distance from each centroid to all the different elements, and then we find which elements are closest to which centroid. Okay, and then we recompute these centroids by the current cluster membership, by finding basically what's the center of this cluster, and we do this procedure again and again. And as you can see here, in number 2, for example, we compute basically the distances to all the different elements, and then we move the centroid to the middle of the elements that are closer, and then again we compute the distance, and then the center moves again into the center of these elements. So now, as we can see here, eventually this cluster will not not the cluster, the centroid will not move too much again, because it is able to find the middle of this group. So this is actually how it works. This is the K-means algorithm. But there are some advantages and disadvantages of this algorithm. So the first one is that one of the advantages is that it's very simple, as you can see here. It's also very fast. Okay, and then it also converges to a local minimum of the error function, because as you can see, there's a moment where the centroid doesn't move anymore. So this is where we can find the local minimum. And yeah, there are actually many different algorithms already implemented in different libraries. For example, in MATLAB or in OpenCV, we can also find some functions to perform these k-means. So some of the disadvantages of k-means is that we manually need to pick k. So if we don't know exactly how many groups are there, it's gonna be difficult to find the optimal outcome. So one other disadvantage is that it's sensitive to initialization, because initially, wherever we pick or the position of the initial centroids, that's also going to define how fast we can get to the best solution, or to which group the centroid will start belonging to. Okay. Another disadvantage is that here k-means, they only find like a spherical cluster, because they are trying to find kind of like the minimum distance to all the elements in this particular group, and sometimes this becomes as a circular approach. Okay. And then we also have that sensitive to outliers. So sometimes there are some points that eventually they don't correspond, or they are too far from a particular to a particular cluster, and still they are included into the cluster. So this is not necessarily true in all the cases. As you can see, we have a graph in the right. So the above, the graph on top, basically there are two clusters, okay, but then we have one outliner that, yeah, sometimes it's fine to have the outliner, and sometimes we don't care about the outliner. But in the bottom we have the k-means results, in which they include the outliner, because this is also corresponds to this particular group. Okay, so this is also one of the disadvantages that we can say about k-means. So for example, if we perform k-means into by using features of colors or like brightness or like intensity, okay, basically what we are doing is just calculating the quantization for the colors to different, the quantization of the pixel properties into different colors. Okay, and this not necessarily has some coherent meaning in terms of spatial properties. For example, they don't have to correspond to a particular object to be able to have the same group. So let me explain what I mean. So for example, we have an image, okay, and we use intensity based clusters, as we can see here. Okay, some of the clusters sometimes correspond to different objects. Okay, so they don't correspond to the same objects, because sometimes they are far away. Okay, and this makes them, even though correspond to the same object, but they are not exactly the same. So how do we fix this? One way is to actually include the position of the pixels as a part of the inputs. So in this case, for example, if we have the image and we have the RGB values, okay, if we put the X and Y position, then we can make sure that some of the clusters will be will have the similarity, not only in the color space, but only on the spatial space. Okay, so for example, right now, in this other example, the clustering is based on the RGB XY values, and which enforces the spatial coherence, as you can see here. And we can actually extract some objects based not only on the color, but also on the distance of the features that are clustered. So now let's talk about the mean shift clustering.